quite a great presentation lined up today, so I don't want to take too much time in waiting and even in my introduction, so that we have lots of time for the presentation. Of course, we always want to leave time for those questions at the end as well. So I am going to get us started, and we'll probably see folks continuing to pop on as we go. So first off, as an important act of reconciliation and gratitude, I do want to take this moment to acknowledge that SARIA operates across Alberta, which is comprised of Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territory, the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations. So good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Pamela Gertson. I'm the Executive Director of the Smart, Sustainable, Resilient Infrastructure Association. In order to keep that much shorter, we refer to it as SARIA. So we did actually take a short break over the summer from our events and webinars. So thanks to those who are joining us again, or even joining us for the first time. SARIA is a not-for-profit organization that is taking a collaborative approach, an industry-led approach to reducing carbon in the built environment by accelerating the adoption of innovative low-carbon solutions. And I think we'll be hearing about some of those innovations in a little bit here today. We are currently funding 16 demonstration projects across Alberta and actively sharing the results of those projects through what we've called the Building Innovation Reference Center. It's a searchable online database of really rich information. So there's some highly technical details, as well as even just kind of overall summaries of some of those projects. I believe we're sharing the link in the chat, so you can link to that and go check it out after the presentation. We'd also, it's a fairly new kind of feature we're presenting, so always happy to get feedback and your thoughts as you test it out and try it out and see what kind of information pops out. We also host a lot of project webinars so that you can get a more in-depth look at those projects, and our next one will actually be next month, and it's focusing on carbon neutral home retrofit that did not require any demolition or any extensive home upgrades. That'll be a great one to get on your calendar. And we're also looking forward to meeting in person more frequently this year. And so have our first networking and trade show event planned for October 13th. That's in collaboration with Solar Alberta. So you can, again, find all the details of those various events on our events calendar that's on our website. That's as long as I'm going to talk about us. But if you do have any further questions about SARIA, please feel free to send me a direct message in the chat, or you can certainly email me at pam@ssria.ca. So today we are featuring two SARIA member companies, SAS Architecture and RadiantLink, who will be tag teaming to provide a thought-provoking presentation on housing innovation, and not only to address carbon reduction, but also with a consideration of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're really happy to showcase two brilliant and passionate women today, Aurélie McPherson, CEO of RadiantLink and a project manager with McPherson Engineering in Regina, and Sherry Shorten, the managing principal of SAS Architecture here in Edmonton. So for the agenda today, Sherry and Aurélie's presentation will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A period, which we can keep open until about 1 o'clock. Questions can go throughout the presentation into the chat box, and so we'll be sure to queue those up once the presentation is done. I believe everyone should have received a reminder when they came into the room that we are recording the session, and we will make the session available to all those who registered afterwards, probably sometime next week. I think that's everything I have to say. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Aurélie to kick us off.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
We can, yeah, perfect, Orly.
Great. Okay, so I want to first mention that I'm very grateful to be on Treaty 4, and that is the home of the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, Saulteaux, and Cree, and Métis. I'm really, really appreciative to Syria for this. We're really excited about this. Sherry and I are sisters, and we've had lots of delicious conversations over the last little while. And it was like, hey, we're working on the same thing, but we're coming from it from a different sustainability lens. So like was mentioned, I am CEO of RadiantLink. I'm very happy to share that RadiantLink has been designed by Canadian engineers, and all components are Canadian made. Okay, so we titled our presentation, What Works in Toronto May Not Work for Us in Edmonton. So we're going to get into why we called it that, but we're really focusing on the existing residential sector is what we want to create the conversation on. And this presentation is really about how do we transition to an action plan to address our 2030, 2050 goals. I'm going to introduce a little bit about RadiantLink, give you a little bit of background about McPherson Engineering. I want to share the Blanket of Warmth project that we worked with Star Blanket Cree Nation on. And then I'm hoping that we can create a discussion about the Canada Greener Homes strategy plan. So a little bit of backstory about McPherson Engineering. Murdo and I started the company 26 years ago. And we knew part of our business plan was always how important education is for the employees of McPherson Engineering. And so I would tell my girlfriends, hey, I'm going to an ASHRAE conference. And they're like, Orly, you don't even smoke. Why are you going to an ASHRAE conference? And so I had to explain to them that you know how you have IT nerds? ASHRAE are like HVAC nerds. And the mission statement absolutely makes my heart grow. It's to serve humanity by advancing the art and science of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. And so when we go to these conferences, we have a ton of fun, but we learn about the latest research that's going on. So one thing that we learned very early on is about radiant floor heating and cooling. And what we discovered in attending these conferences, that if you want to deliver 500,000 BTUs, if you want to distribute the energy by heating and cooling, you're going to need large pumps, not just average pumps. You're going to need large pumps, and they take a great deal of energy to operate. Whereas if you shift that distribution to water, it takes very little to do that. My screen just disappeared. Oh my gosh. What are you guys seeing?
We still see the slides.
Oh, I don't. Darn. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay, so then we became very curious about, okay, how we're delivering energy. And so this is kind of a joke in our office. It's to leave no BTU behind. It's like we want to make sure that we're using our energy the best way we can. So what we did is we started in 2001, we installed our first in-floor heating into a school. And this was a school that it was in a crawl space. And most schools at the time were coming in around $2.20. And this one came in at $1.47. I said, wow, that's kind of interesting. Then we had the opportunity to do a school in 2012. And we did in-floor heating, in-floor cooling on a crawl space. And it came down to $1.04. And we went, wow. 2 years later, we did another school, but we did slab on grade, in-floor heating, in-floor cooling. And we only insulated around the perimeter of the building because we were curious what Mother Nature, what the earth could do to help warm and cool that building. And it came in at 24 cents. And we went, wow, this is going in the right direction. So I'm going to talk a lot about thermal mass. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what thermal mass is. And the teepee is a really good example of how it was used the first time. So the ventilation system of a teepee is award-winning by today's standards. And what they did is they put the fire in the middle of the teepee, and then they circled the fire with the rocks. And what the fire does is it radiates heat, and then the materials of the rocks take on that warmth, so that when the fire goes out at night, there's still warmth and comfort in that teepee. And that's a really good example of what activating the thermal mass is. So fourth, I was doing some volunteer work, and I had the opportunity to work with Star Blanket Cree Nation, and a few members came to me and said, hey, Aurelie and Murdo, we're really concerned about our homes because we think the houses are making us sick. So that's when the Blanket of Warmth project started. And so when we went out to see the homes, the First Nations called it a wicked problem. And so it had been around for a long time. And what it was damp, cold, musty, energy guzzling basements that weren't working. The HVAC system was not working. So because it had been around for a long time, we had this opportunity to just do whatever we wanted because nothing had been working. So we said, okay, let's ship this up. And let's use the 17 goals of sustainable development as a platform to see if we can address this issue. And so that's what we did. So the 4 pillars of sustainable development are economy, environment, culture, and social values. And there's always a lot of talk about how much something costs or what's the impact on the environment. But we rarely look at the culture or social values. But if you want to design based on the 2030, 2040 global goals, you have to ask the questions about culture and social values. And that's why Sherry and I said, hey, let's talk about culture. Let's talk about, and what affects culture in Alberta and Edmonton and Saskatchewan is quite a bit different than what affects Toronto. So using the 17 goals gave us the tool belt to ask some really good questions. We had absolutely no money for this project, so we couldn't tear up the floor and put the PEX piping in the floor, which you usually do. But we had won an ASHRAE award for putting the PEX piping in the walls, and we won that award in 2012. So we said, okay, so I reached out to my girlfriend, Nicole Miller at Upanor, and I said, Nicole, would you help me on this project? And within 2 seconds, she said yes. So we used the fast track from Upanor and we put it on the walls. It took like a day to install. It was really quite quick and easy to do. So that was the first innovation we did. The second innovation is and we call this HVAC art, because remember, we're HVAC nerds. So what we did is we looked at what was working in that basement, and the furnace was doing a good job. So we said, okay, let's attach RadiantLink to the furnace and make that furnace work even better. So we take the warmth and coolness that the furnace and the air conditioner create, and we put it through RadiantLink. We convert that into hydronics, and we're able to passively cool the home. So this is a hybrid system. It's affordable and it's a one-day installation. I'm super proud of our control panel. HVAC design requires simplicity and elegance, and I really think our control panel represents elegance. So we've got a small pump, we've got our control gauge and expansion tank, and that's it. That's all there is. So it really is HVAC art. So when we started the problem of the cold, damp, musty, energy guzzling basement, we reached out to the university and we were able to get a capstone student project started with the U of R. And what we did is we compared 2 houses, one with RadiantLink and one without, and they were both equally about the same. The home without RadiantLink did not comply to ASHRAE standard 55. The home, after we installed the RadiantLink, we were able to warm the walls up by 3 degrees, and we were able to comply. So what that means is this home is comfortable and not energy gluttonous. and we were able to remove the risk of mold because we dried out the wall. So mold needs a damp, musty space. And when you dry out the wall using hydronic, you solve that problem. So you can see that just a simple shift in how we distribute the energy, we were able to increase the efficiency. So the comfort we created was between 21 and 22 degrees in the basement, as opposed to 18, which is really, really uncomfortable. So what did we do? The homes complied with ASHRAE standard 55, so they met comfort. We reduced the energy consumption of the home by $900 a year. And this comes from, if people are not comfortable in their homes, they will turn to whatever they can to create comfort. And that's usually at Costco. And they go there and they buy their plug-in auxiliary heaters because the HVAC system is not doing its job. But by plugging in those auxiliary heaters, it's very expensive. And very inefficient way to try and deliver comfort. By activating the thermal mass of the building, we built in 12.9 hours of residual heat during a power outage, which creates adaptation and resiliency. So if we have a power outage and it's cold, that house will not fall apart. We've got 12 hours to get, SAS Energy or SAS Power to do what they need to do to get us back up and running. By redesigning the HVAC system, we reduce the risk of dying in a fire. If you look at the packaging for those electric space heaters, from November to March, 80% of fire deaths are related to that equipment. So it's like, holy cow, the HVAC equipment is actually putting people at risk. So by redesigning the HVAC system, we take that whole issue of fire right out of the equation. By addressing indoor air quality, activating the thermal mass, we keep the walls dry. And so that creates comfort, and it improves indoor air quality. We won 3 awards for this project. 2021, the APEX Exceptional Engineering Award. We won a SAB Magazine Green Buildings Award, Technical Award, and we won a United Nations Regional Center of Expertise for this work. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the Canada Greener Homes Grant. So there's a lot of talk about heat pumps, and the grant offers funds to homeowners if they install a heat pump. But it kind of puts us in a bit of a problem, because if you look at what ASHRAE said, and they came out with their position paper June of 2022. I can hear somebody else talking. So what does ASHRAE say about heat pumps in cold climate? They say more research is needed. They haven't been tested for cold climates. So here we are, the grants are encouraging this, but yet they haven't been fully tested for climates like Alberta and Saskatchewan. So we want to set the community up for success. What we're about to face, it requires us all to work together. And traditionally we were all in our own gopher holes doing our own things. But goal number 17 is about partnership, working together, just like what we're doing today, creating conversations, coming together and thinking about how we're going to transition to those 2030, 2050 goals. We really have to have discussions about responsible consumption and production, because we can't take all the existing homes and throw them in the garbage in the landfill and start anew. That's just not possible. So we have to look at what's working, what can we do better, and how can we build success for the community. And one thing we really, really have to look at is in the 17 goals, it talks about affordable and clean energy. So the 17 goals set you up to ask the really good questions. So as designers, be it architects, engineers, when we go to design, it's really important that we have the tools so that we can ask the right questions. So putting a heat pump, does that create affordable, clean energy in our provinces when our energy sources aren't renewable yet? I mean, we're working towards that, but they're nowhere near what's happening in BC or Toronto. So we have to ask the good questions so that we don't run amok and make our carbon footprint even heavier. We ask the good questions. So we really do need to address and ask the hard questions. What is the energy source affordable and clean, and will it work and perform for our culture and our climates. The next steps, just wanted to share, Murdo and I have been accepted to present the Blanket of Warmth project at the Building Decarbonization Conference in Greece, focusing on the 17 goals of sustainable development. So we're super excited about that. And we have a project working with Corrections Canada to install 2 units to activate the thermal mass of tiny houses, because we know it's important that affordable housing, that we create comfort in those houses. We can't make a house that's miserable. We have to ask those hard questions. I can't tell you how exciting it is when you work together to create compassionate professionalism and social sustainability. We had so much fun on the project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my sister, Sherry, who has done some incredible work that I'm really proud of. And what she's doing in architecture is the same thing that we were doing in HVAC. We just gave it a real good rethink. So with that, Sherry, I will let you take over.
Hi, thank you, Arlie. Can you see my screen?
We just see you right now, Sherry. We're not seeing your screen share.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
No.
Oh. How about now?
Not seeing it for some reason.
Okay, here we go. I think we got it. Oh, I have to hit the share button. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, now we do see it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Siri. And thank you, Arlie, for the nice intro. My name is Sherry. I'm with SAS Architecture, and the title of our presentation is What Works in Toronto May Not Work in Edmonton. And I'm speaking today about more site development side of trying to build housing, building sustainable housing in the context of our current regulatory system and planning and development in our cities. And it varies across the country, what's happening with municipalities. But what's happening in Edmonton right now is exciting because we are talking about changing our regulations. And so it's very important to have sustainability up on the table as those conversations are happening. So here's our office. We are a virtual office. I've been a virtual office for 10 years. There's Jessica at the top right-hand side. She worked in our office in Edmonton when she was traveling around the world. She's back in Berlin. She has 3 children in elementary school, and she does give design services for us on occasion. And so we're very happy to have her and collaborate with her. Also sitting beside me is Mariah. She's at the bottom. She's a student from Holland, and she's studying housing for her 4th term. So we're happy to have her here. She's studying at, do you want to?
It's Windesheim in Holland.
And Valerie, she's in Calgary. She is from Ukraine, and so she's in the process of getting her certifications completed here in Canada. But it's very difficult since her country is at war. But she's very helpful, and we collaborate all the time, even though she's in another city. And Sammy Joe and Sky are family, and they are a lot of help all the time. So today is a 20-minute presentation on sharing ideas about redeveloping underutilized intercity land, urban land in Edmonton using smart, sustainable 3D site development design practices. We tend not to want to talk about design practices in terms of regulatory conversations, but I think it's a very important topic that starts to address those issues of culture and social issues that Orly was talking about. We are also going to examine sustainable approaches within our city's current planning and development regulatory toolkit. And I advocate for alignment with energy efficiency targets set through the building codes and better design practices. So I'd like to explain a bit more about what that means in terms of changing our regulations. You seen the bar? I'm going to minimize that. And then I'm going to present a case study, which is our proposed infill project that uses RadiantLink. So innovation, SAS Architecture has separate work that we do. We advocate for housing and housing innovation. And to do that, we need partners. So housing innovation partnerships is a big piece of what we do in our firm. In 2020, working with the architect stakeholder team, we had a roundtable, and Leslie Bain joined us at the table for that. She's from Seattle, Washington. And conversation with Leslie was really interesting because she gave us lessons learned about densification. And I think the biggest takeaway for me in Leslie's presentation was that Seattle is the fastest growing city in the US. When she was speaking to us, it was growing faster than New York City and Chicago combined. So they were seeing very intense densification. And with that came a lot of compression on the city and negative outcomes that we tend not to want to deal with when we are so excited about building new and generating economic development with these big projects. So some of the things that came out of this in Seattle were that rents went up, commercial space got more expensive, and the growth disproportionately impacted vulnerable communities because they had to move. So here in Edmonton, working with a group of architects in our city called the Architect Stakeholder Team, we have been providing feedback to the city of Edmonton for a long time, several years, and there's architects in our city who have been talking about these conversations for very long, 30 years. Probably we've been talking about this conversation of growth in our city and how to plan our city. And the way that we handle this now is we zone lot by lot. We zone each site to reflect current values, but we're going at it one lot at a time. So what we expected when city plan was being created was that Edmonton's inner city core would be a priority in redevelopment, and there's a reason for that. Sorry, I need the next slide. That this area is called the mature neighborhoods of our city. So in this area, there are immediate redevelopment needs that are the result of old buildings that are not performing well in terms of energy efficiency. So there's a lot of buildings that need to be renovated or relooked at in terms of energy efficiency. The Canadian federal government has recently announced that we have a deficit of 3.5 million homes based on population data. So there is a significant need to be talking about housing. This is a significant area of our city. And if our cities themselves would like to reduce their input, we need to have a conversation about housing. So other partners that we're working with, we're very excited to work with IFSA, Intelligent Futures through the Housing Supply Challenge, also with Ask for a Better World. We're looking at redeveloping an inner city project through that work. We just completed a net zero ready home in Pemberton, BC. There's a lot of people looking at net zero in BC, so it was really a great opportunity to learn a lot about that type of building. We're currently working in Vegreville, converting the old federal immigration building from office cubicles into spacious units. It's going to be 41 units put in that building. And we also work with larger firms quite often. It's another area of work that we do. And so we're working with Shauna Noyes Architect on a big project in Kamloops. Okay, so I want to drill down. Orly talked about global values, and I want to keep drilling down to the neighborhood, right down to, back to the lot. So the context that I'm showing you right now is a piece of portion of Edmonton where I live, my community. There's a lot of new development. There's a very big development that is happening. It's called Regency Developments. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's down here at the corner where the circle is. Across from that is the boardwalk. And the subject land that we're developing here is over here where you see this square over here. This is also along the transit. So there is an intent here to create a denser community. But what's in question here is how we transition that density into our lower scale neighborhoods. So we would hope that our regulations would take care of that, but this picture here is just to sort of illustrate to you what built form is and how it's created through our regulations. So on the left-hand side of the screen is a picture of two tall buildings in our city. One is the new building, Regency, on the left. But in terms of built form, these are 1960 zoning guidelines. So this is how we transition from a big tall building to a residential neighborhood based on 1960s regulations. And you can see that this building, which is being built right now, follows those old regulations in theory, I suppose. So there is a challenge for developers and architects to bypass and get to the good conversations when we're dealing with this base of regulations that is fairly old. So the question becomes, what do we change in those regulations and what do we keep? Why regulatory reform? We're moving to values-based codes in order to pick up those social values that are being sort of left out of the conversation. So the importance of local policies and regulations relates to how we bring society's vision and the values that go along with it to life. 20th century planning involves shaping our cities and changing values to people, to center people and to center culture in the design of the cities that we share. City builders are people who put relationships, share policy making, or design buildings in public spaces. The legal basis of code values, such as public safety or health and welfare, are a set of values behind everything we design in the architectural and engineering industry. Another point of fact about regulatory roadblocks, let's call them, is that in order to deliver a sustainable project, we work as architects and engineers through a process through very set ways. And the importance of site development and site analysis happens very early on in the project when we're talking about zoning regulations. That's when we want to be designing and considering sustainable goals in our work. And the tendency that I hear in our city repeatedly is that, oh, we deal with that at the building permit stage because the building codes are enforcing energy efficiency. But by that time, when you get into a project, it's really too late to apply some of the better site context tools, such as I showed you in the Regency project. And after we've spent 30% of our fees on the work, we're not really going to go back and rethink things. So early in the process, starting early in the process is where we need to start to talk about sustainable design, not at building permit stage. Okay, so let's look at the original 60s neighborhood that we're trying to renovate in most of our mature neighborhoods. I guess they're anything from turn of the century to 60s, 70s housing that is in the mature neighborhoods area. And so this is the location where we are proposing a RadiantLink Lab, which is basically an infill. So what are the sustainable development ideas that don't align with our current regulations? Is what we're sort of asking the question, and what we did is we applied the sustainable goals to this project as Orly outlined in her presentation. So what I want to talk about here with RadiantLink Lab, I've already talked about alignment, the need for alignment of sustainable development bylaws with our building codes. That's work that we need to do now, and that's work that Siri can really also help support. I'm going to talk about the use of our 3D modeling tools for massing solar studies and that work that we do at early design to understand how that delivers on the goals. So the goals that we're trying to achieve on this site are good health and well-being. Goal number 3, goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. Goal number 9, industry, innovation, and architecture. Goal number 10, reduced inequalities. Goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And goal number 12, consumption and responsible consumption and production. And so to start talking about a site development, to start to talk about site design, when we start a development, we need to consider morphology and geography. And that's where we need to start looking locally, thinking locally, starting from looking at local, and that's where what works in Toronto may not work in Edmonton. So solar studies are done to determine impacts on neighbors and what the sun angle is in Toronto is not the same as what it is in Edmonton. I think Edmonton is a very northern city. It's a cold city. And so when we build tall buildings, we do create dark, unfriendly spaces that are not that comfortable. So that, to me, is a very important conversation we're not having in Edmonton right now, and we'd like to have that. So that's this conversation, is how can we build differently? How can we build more gently? How can we increase density a little bit more moderately and be a little more in the middle? So the site analysis of this project, first of all, we're going to renovate and adapt the existing home to retrofit energy efficiency using RadiantLink. And we'll be using the same systems that Orly mentioned. So they are affordable, they are local, they're effective, and they will, what they will do is they will have the impact actually in this house, which is under insulated, of increasing the temperature in the building, making it more comfortable, as well as making it more energy efficient. We're going to add a garden suite for passive income. That is age in place concept, and that adds to socioeconomic equity. So for myself, I would like to actually sell off that back lot. That's not possible at this time, but you know, someone could move into the back lot, sell the front lot. The front lot can stay there for a while and can be redeveloped later, as opposed to what we're doing right now is we're knocking these houses down and splitting our lots down the middle to create just as much density as I'm doing here. So this is just a bit more of an organic way to develop the lot. And thirdly, we're going to add a commercial office. So this is an adaptive reuse. It will be a commercial office plus a dwelling, and it will be also energy efficient. So there's a lot of challenges with that office structure in terms of getting this through zoning, our zoning right now. We'll show you pictures at the end of the presentation of what this looks like. And the biggest problem right now is that because we don't have laws that recognize some of these social values like adaptive reuse, age in place, it's very difficult to convince our city planners to shift off of their 1960s templates that they really have to follow. So we're both struggling to have this conversation and to make this work, and it's taking far too long is the issue. So this work is coming up now in our city of changing our regulations, and we need to be there and continue to advocate for sustainable site development opportunities. So this is the plan, and what this does is increases the floor area ratio from 12.61% to 47.3%, which represents, actually that would be not very much density, but it does increase the density of this site, which would be 1 occupant to 10, potentially 10 occupants. And the floor area, you can see here, the floor area ratio is increased by 73%. So on the one hand, the original home being 12.61% is extremely low in terms of how much density we can currently build on this site. So building to 47% is not a stretch on our current regulations, but it certainly is a stretch on public perception to have this kind of development come into the neighborhood, which is where some of the problems with
Sherry, you're muted for some reason.
Okay. So the 12.1% is low, 47.3% is not that too far over from what the laws allow, but yet it's still a very difficult process to enter the planning application process and execute this work without significant time and energy put in. So it would be nice if this understanding of what sustainable building was built into our regulations already, and we wouldn't have to spend that time. Okay, as mentioned by Orly, we're going to use the RadiantLink system, which is that uses thermal mass, and I'm not going to explain it because Orly has already explained it, but this is the addition onto the house. We're taking a space beside the house. It's a driveway that's a vacant space and filling it in with new construction to make way for space for people to occupy that space. It's just a dead space on the lot right now. So at the end of the day, we will use passive design to achieve 20% CO2 reduction. The work of the thermodynamics is our next step, is to look at how the thermodynamics will, what they will accomplish. And quite frankly, the challenge there in that work is that we have just recently got to the point where we have the tools to be able to do this. So the free tools that we get from the government, they don't have all the scripts and whatnot to fully understand the impact of thermodynamics. And that's what Orly was talking about, what they were seeing in the schools and that reduction of energy use through a radiant cooling heating system. This is data that has yet to be tapped into. So we're estimating with this project that we will easily achieve the 50% by 2030 to be compliant, but we know that we can go much further. So our next steps are to do the data testing. When it comes to, I guess, energy building in housing, what we're really talking about is thermal mass, the walls as a thermal mass. So even if we were talking about a stud wall, a passive house wall, we're still talking about a massive wall. So a critical piece of the energy efficiency equation that helps us succeed at achieving the targets is really in how we design that wall. So through this project, we will be looking at various wall systems and testing various wall systems to see how they interact with the radiant. We're looking at concrete, but we're also going to be looking at a wood frame building. So this is just some illustrations showing mass walls. Exterior insulation, interior insulation, adding to make the wall thicker and more resistant to energy loss is the basic fundamental theory. So the energy system of thermal mass, Orly already explained some of this, but you know, we tend to talk about housing as being adding 4 inches or 2 inches of insulation on the outside of the house. And we have in the past really kind of given concrete a hard go, although concrete is the most widely used building material on earth. As a result of its versatility, beauty, strength, and durability, concrete is used in most types of construction, including homes, buildings, roads, bridges, airports, subways, and water structures, water resource structures. So it's unlikely that we're going to stop using concrete. So our primary analysis of this project, because it is inner city, is to look at durable materials like concrete, a concrete wall. And when we think of the concrete wall as performing not only the heating and the structure and the beauty, it's actually achieving a lot of tasks at once. But how do we measure that and how that value of that? So some of the characteristics of the thermal mass in concrete are that thermal mass has fewer spikes in heating and cooling requirements due to concrete's low thermal conductivity and high specific heat capacity desirable in building construction. Climates with larger daily temperature swing, thermal mass uses less energy than similar low mass buildings due to reduced heat transfer through massive elements. Thermal mass can shift energy demand to off-peak time periods when utility rates are lower, reducing peak loads and reducing loads in many climate locations. Thermal mass works best when exposed on the inside, and it increases the livability by addressing comfort. I can't see that. Okay, so here's the plan, and here are some of the ideas of energy efficiency in this lot. And I guess the sustainable ideas that deal with the 4 pillars, not just, you know, the typical things that we concern ourselves with, which is the energy bills. So you can see that this flexible office space could also convert to a dwelling. We have created a plan for this addition. So this could be the existing dwelling. Could be is a family home. It's a 3-bedroom home. We could add 2 units in the back. These are unit 1 on the bottom, unit 2 is on the top. The blue shaded areas would be concrete walls and the provide the major support for the building. We're trying to reduce the number of materials in this project to minimize construction time. We'll use solar panels where we have a lot of solar gain. We'd like to use the thermal mass as a battery, and we will be doing in-floor, in-wall heating and cooling.
Sherry, our time's almost up.
Oh, okay.
So we should read.
But at that, I have some photos, some images of the project that I just like to share. I can leave it at this. So here's the development, and I think the just to conclude is that how can we build and densify in our inner city neighbors with less impact and contribute back to all these sustainable goals. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Sherry and Orly. And yes, we will, in addition to the recording, we can also share your slides if you're okay with that, because there is some really great visuals there that people might want to dig into a little bit more.
For sure.
We do have some time now for those who can stick around for a Q&A session. So we have a manageable enough group that I think we could probably figure out how to ask questions live if people are interested in that. So if you want to just put your hand up, I'd be happy to call on you and then you can unmute and ask your question. Alternatively, if you're in a really noisy environment, you can certainly pop your questions in the chat and I'd be happy to read those out and get a response from Sherry and Orly. So while you're all thinking up your great questions or comments with regards to the presentation, maybe I'll actually just start because I had one thought as Orly was going through her presentation. Something that we're talking a lot about, and you both touched on it briefly too, is when we're talking about these carbon reduction goals by 2050, we know we need to start moving away from fossil fuels. This is often a fairly heated debate in Alberta because due to our climate and our grid mix, it's just not really a straightforward answer. So I was just really curious with the RadiantLink, knowing that it's connected to a natural gas furnace, how does that improve the efficiency of the furnace overall, or where are we kind of seeing those energy savings coming from with that product and that solution?
Where you're seeing the energy savings is that it goes back to how we distribute the air. So by using energy to warm air and cool air is very expensive, and it's a luxury the world doesn't have. And so what RadiantLink does, it's a hybrid system, and so we take existing well-known, well-working equipment, but we just make them better. And it doesn't make the energy work, doesn't make the furnace work any harder. There's very low resistance on the furnace. But what it does is it gives us time so that maybe down the road we can segue to electric furnaces or attach to a heat pump, but it's a transition phase. And it really goes back to the principles that we learned at ASHRAE, that heating air and that's the conversation we have to have, is why do we distribute the energy using air, which is very expensive?
Yeah, that's great. That's, I think, a great point to make, is the transition piece, because there definitely does need to be a transition period. And so any technologies that kind of support that, I think, are valuable additions to the mix. And then
you're right, Pam, the conversations are heated and concerning, but it's really important that we have these hard, messy questions, conversations, because we can't leave anyone behind. We have to have solutions that, for what we're about to face, there is no you or me, there's only an us. And we cannot leave anyone behind. And so let's look for those solutions. Let's have those hard conversations. Let's get a broom and get the best and the bright in there, and let's find what works for the culture of Alberta, what works for the culture of Saskatchewan. And it might need a little tweaking, but we can do it.
Yeah, fantastic. So I see Stephanie has her hand up. So Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Great. Look, I love your presentation. I love the approach. My husband and I did convert our home into a net zero home a while ago, but I wish I knew then about radiant panels instead of going to the air. But, you know, we worked with what we knew at the time. I did want to ask Sherry, with the plan that you have you had an opportunity, have you talked to the city yet about that kind of plan, like sort of those early development discussions that they encourage, except, you know, they're not, I don't know. I'm just wondering how they've received your plan so far.
Okay, so sorry, there's a car making a loud noise out there. We have talked to the city, and I was quite disappointed that the response was there's the challenge with the plan is that there's a wall on zero lot line, and how we're building close to the zero lot line. And I have reasons why I think that would work if I had a conversation with my neighbor and what I know about my neighbor and what he plans to do in the future. And that's why we need to, you know, deal with some of the things at that level. So the concerns of the city for infill are that they're concerned about, rightfully, about construction methods and techniques, which is why this project as a slab on grade is a really smart way to build infill in our city, because we're not digging holes in basements, but we're still capitalizing on the slab on grade and the concrete thermal mass. The city has concerns about coming into a residential neighborhood with construction materials and upsetting the neighbors and causing foundations to collapse. But I think that's where we need to have a conversation with our architects and engineers on our zoning regulations, because we do have solutions to that. Those should not be roadblocks and where we stop.
Agreed. I agree. I think the city is a bit too backwards, and I think there's probably people at the city that are more forward thinking, but as a collective, as a bureaucracy, I think they're still, like you say, back in the 70s or 80s in their thinking and their processes. But I do love what you're saying about we need to have those conversations. I do work on my my community league planning group and trying to have those conversations at least at that neighborhood level, but it is a slow process, right? Trying to get the right people at the table and trying to get that many together. Do either of you or any of you have any thoughts about how to push those conversations a little further with the right people at the table, with the city or with planners and architects and engineers?
Go ahead, Sherry.
Well, I don't have a solution, Stephanie, and we work hard on that stuff. And so I hear you. I think events like this, it's about the citizens of the city participating, but also understanding where we have to go and what we have to do as architects and engineers to achieve and meet the regulations. And that we can still do all this and everybody can be happy and comfortable at the end of the day, that the design creates solutions that makes people feel good and warm and comfortable.
Yeah, I think I would agree too. And I think it's great, Stephanie, that you're already talking to the neighbors and bringing that perspective to the table, because I think there's a few different levels of discussions that do need to take place. And, you know, even within the architecture and engineering industry, there's a lot of work to bring everybody kind of on board and up to speed. But at the same time, when you're talking about infill development, and you could have one neighbor in a block or more, and we've had some projects that they had to go to fairly extensive community engagement and outreach, that can really throw a project off the rails. So I think, you know, working on that kind of social context as well at the same time.
I'll just jump in there real quick, Stephanie. What we learned in the blanket of warmth is we did a lot of community engagement. And we really, because that's part of 17 goals, is that you can't hoard knowledge, you've got to share knowledge. And we also hired local tradespeople. And what happened is it became coffee shop talk. And so we inspired hope, we inspired, you know, a conversation. And it just happens at that grassroots level. And so, you know, using social media, using your local newspapers, having those conversations in the living room, those are really, really important conversations. And Sherry and I would love to present to your community if you ever want. So
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, ladies.
And we have a question from Steve.
Yeah, I've always kind of been under the impression that thermal mass or radiant-based systems were more difficult or less appropriate to use in climates where you had, you know, rapid changes in temperature, that they would have harder time adjusting. Is there anything you could say about your system in regards to that?
We are a slave to the furnace. So in the shoulder season, there are 2 or 3 days that we don't get perfect comfort. But because it's a hybrid system, we're taking 2 of the best pieces of equipment and marrying them together. And I can tell you in my house, my air conditioner does not come on till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas my neighbor starts at about 11 in the morning. And the only reason for that is because we're taking some of the coolness out of the basement and we're just distributing it better. So there are myths and there are things out there, but because climate change and the climate crisis is right there, we need to have these conversations and sort of debunk things. And the one thing that I'm super proud of about RadiantLink is it really is an elegant system. It's very simple. There's not a lot of maintenance to it. It's easy to use. And it just checks off all the boxes. We're creating comfort. We're getting rid of mold. We're reducing energy consumption. We're, you know, it's Canadian design by engineers for Canadian cold climate. So we haven't noticed difficulties.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, with that, we're just coming up to 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. The week has been flying by crazy. So I'd just like to thank again Sherry and Orly for the presentation. It was just a great, yeah, lots of thought-provoking kind of comments that we can all take away and hopefully continue to have those discussions down the road. And we do hope that those of you who are in Edmonton can join us in October 13th, during our kind of networking event and trade show that will be taking place in the evening. We're actually, Nate is hosting us, so a lovely venue there to be hosting us, and just a great time to get together and chat and maybe continue some of these conversations. So thanks again. And as I mentioned, the presentation will be shared with all those of you who registered. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.